Hey guys, welcome back. Robocraft Early Access coverage. This is episode 58. I'm Enigmius, and today we're prototyping the Panther bee. This is the replacement for the Spider Bee Mark II. We built the Spider Bee Mark II. There have been some changes to the game since the last Spider Bee was in service. I wasn't really happy with the changes in terms of how it impacted the bot, so we decided to go a slightly different direction. It's still going to be a rail bot, still going to have legs, but instead of wings with the goal of flight, we're going to have hover blades to preserve that ability to move around quickly, hopefully with a little bit more stability and a little bit more reliability in terms of being able to keep those components with the bot. Having wings sticking out of a bot is kind of a recipe for disaster at the best of times. So we're going to see what we can do with hover blades and walker legs. Now, I'd seen in matches, or more specifically heard, when someone spots a rail bot with hover blades, rail hover spotted, and thought to myself, like, who in their right mind builds a rail bot with hover blades? Because if that was all it was a rail bot with hover blades, it would never be able to zoom in or aim in properly. It would always be having an accuracy penalty, until I finally decided, you know what, I'm going to go take a look at what these bots actually look like before they're half destroyed. So when I heard one that was spotted, I would actually go over and take a look. Found out that it's walker legs, hover blades. Makes sense. And we kind of need to mix things up a little bit with this bot in order to make it work the way that we're hoping that it will work. One of the things I decided I wanted to do was add an extra gun. So the beginning of this prototyping is laying out the guns, as we've been doing so many bots before. We lay out the guns first. Now with this prototyping, I wanted to just kind of focus on that, because it ended up being a little bit more tricky than I thought it would be to kind of figure out how to make everything fit together and get the results that we were hoping for, at least in the preliminary stages of the design. So this whole episode is just prototyping and testing in the practice map, and you'll see what I'm talking about in terms of getting things to work the way that we had hoped. So we're using the allowance of asymmetrical building, if you could call it that. Instead of saying to ourselves everything has to be symmetrical so that it's all balanced and blah blah blah, that it doesn't have to be symmetrical. We can kind of shift things, even if it's just a block or two in any given direction. Sometimes that's all it takes to make things fit better than if they were all sort of on the same plane, or oriented a certain way in a symmetrical building style. You can see here, these aren't wildly asymmetrical. They're just a little bit off, a little bit in this direction or that direction, and we're able to get 4 guns in a relatively small sort of form factor. We don't have to have this giant bot just to get the 4 guns on. I've seen bots with more than 4 tier 10 railguns on them. They're generally ground bound, cruisers, tanks, whatever. They aren't usually able to get around very quickly. I like the ability to get around quickly. That's why we do all this crazy stuff with all the crazy things. So you can see we've got tier 10 hover blades going on, trying to keep the center of gravity in a way that will allow us to not be tipping over all the time. I guess you could say that. We want the blades as high up on the bot as possible so that it's very, very easy to keep the center of gravity below the hover blades, which should hopefully give us a more stable bot, is the roundabout way of saying it. So that's what we're doing. That's why the hover blades go on second, is so that we can get them in the position that we want them to be in without also putting ourselves in a position where we have to dig into the bot to find room to put them. You can see the middle hover blades now are in such a position that it's going to be a little bit tricky to properly protect the rails on either side. We'll still be able to do it, but it was one of the things that I noticed as I was building. Like, we're kind of not leaving ourselves a ton of room around those rails, and in fact the tops of the hover blades, for most of them, if not all of them, are going to be exposed, which in a lot of cases is kind of a bad thing, but in terms of a rail walker, not necessarily. Usually, if it comes down to a case of a plasma bomber flanking you or getting the jump on you and starts blopping stuff down on top of you, you're pretty much screwed anyways. Like, it's very, very rare that you're going to be able to get away with enough left on your bot that you're going to be able to continue to contribute to what's going on in the match. So I'm not too worried about the hover blades getting shot off from the top, as long as they're protected from the front, because that's where we ideally want to be positioning ourselves, so that the enemy sees the front of our bot and the tops of our guns, and that's it. That's the goal. That's kind of the way we want things to be set up. Now, you notice also, unlike the last several walkers that we've made, the legs on the front are going so that they're sticking out the sides. And this is, again, kind of taking a look at what was working and not working. on previous walkers that we've made. Having the ones in the back sticking out the back is not a bad idea because it kind of keeps them together. They aren't sticking out quite so far. Having the ones on the front oriented so that they're sticking out to the front wasn't really doing much for us because the legs don't have enough armor to sustain a lot of punishment, is basically what it gets down to. But when we're looking at something like that and saying, okay, there's no point in worrying about where the front legs are unless it's actually, there's a performance benefit to doing it a certain way, then we can kind of look at what we can control and ignore what we can't. We can't control that the legs very easy to get shot off just by taking direct damage, but we can protect the blocks that they're sitting on by having them a little bit farther back in the bot with a beefier front end so that you can't just shoot the blocks that the legs are sitting on without getting through the whole armored front. So there was that. I wasn't too worried about losing the ability to cling to walls and things. That was one of the reasons why we put the front legs facing forward at one point in time, is because it made it easier for the legs to grab onto things as you were coming in for a landing or trying to stick to a wall as you were approaching it. With the changes to the way things have been behaving, what we found with the Spider Bee Mark II is that was no longer the case. Having them on the front just made things even more squirrely. It made them even more difficult to control. So we're going to be relying on the hover controls in conjunction with the legs to get us where we want to be, positioned to grab onto things, get stabilized so that we can start shooting with good aim. That's kind of the whole idea here. Now that we've got hover blades, weapons, and legs in place, there was the question of the rudders, and you can see we've got some rudders in the front and the rudders in the back. This was a mistake, but for strange reasons that I still don't understand. And I'm just pointing that out now because sometimes it's fun to make things a mystery and let you wait 2 or 3 minutes before you see what's going on, and other times it's just good to be straight up and point out that rudders in the front, rudders in the back don't work. I don't know why. You'll see when we go into the practice map, but what I'm doing now is I'm actually building out the chassis with the white blocks, still prototyping, to see where we're going to be able to place blocks in a way that doesn't conflict with the guns, doesn't conflict with the legs, doesn't conflict with all the other things on the bot, so that when I'm building, say, front to back along one side of the bot, I can see ahead of time where I'm going to end up building to maximize the space available to me without having to worry about running into that spot where you can't place the block that you were hoping to be able to place because you just found out that that's where one of the legs intersects and it won't let you place it. So we're doing a little more prototyping with the chassis than we normally would, just to make sure that everything kind of fits together when we start doing the armoring. 3 thrusters in the front so that they pull instead of push the bot. Gives better control when the bot starts taking damage. You don't have to worry about a weight change resulting in a bot that just wants to flip all over the place. It's a little bit easier as long as the thrusters are still in place to get around, because they'll pull you instead of kind of flopping you all over the place. Now here's an example of what happens when you've got rudders on the front and rudders on the back. You can see we're going to come up over here. The leg's going to catch. That was oops. And then we keep going. The rudder on the front all of a sudden just starts doing crazy stuff. It actually made us do that little backflip, and then when we try to control it, it tips and it tilts and it does all kinds of crazy stuff. So I said, okay, maybe that was a result of what happened with the leg. I didn't know it was the rudder quite yet. And you can go straight for a certain period of time, and then all of a sudden the rudder pulls you up and it wants to flip you backwards. So I said, okay, well, we can anticipate that. When we see the nose start to tip up, we'll hold down shift, and hopefully that will tilt the nose down and we'll be able to retain control. And that's when it just starts going all over the damn place. So there was an element of control that's being lost by having the rudders on the front as well as the back. And it didn't really take that long to figure out exactly what was going on. In a situation like that where the bot is just going absolutely crazy for no known reason, the easiest thing to do is take it back into the garage, pull something off, and then go back into the practice map and see if that fixes it. If it doesn't fix it, put the stuff you just removed back on, pull something else off, go back out into the practice map and see if it fixes it. It took 12 minutes. It's basically how long it took me, just running some really basic tests to see what I could remove from the bot that would allow us to drive forward or hover forward, as the case may be, without the crazy flipping and flopping. And you can see here, it's not doing so well in terms of lifting us off the ground in this sort of configuration, and scaling the mountain just with the hover blades themselves. But as long as we remember to hold shift to lower what the bot wants to use as your sort of minimum altitude, it's pretty easy to grab hold of the mount when you're in that position and just kind of go up fairly easily. So there's a difference for me between things that just aren't working for no known reason or a known reason that sucks, and things that we have to adjust to the way that they work based on the mechanics of the game. Getting the bot to scale walls fluidly and easily is one of those things of just adjusting to it. You're, remembering in the back of your mind, you're in a hover that's holding you above the ground. When you get to that wall, it still wants to do that. So if you don't say, okay, lower me to the ground, so to speak, it's going to push you off the wall, which we find out the hard way. Everything we find out the hard way. So most of the things with regards to what the bot is doing right now are working pretty well. The guns are in a good position. They aren't firing into the backs of one another. It's very easy to get into a position where you can fire all 4 guns anywhere you want to fire them and have them go on target. So we just have to get this flipping and flopping sorted out. It's only so much flipping and flopping you can do before you realize that, yeah, it's flipping and flopping. So here we're going to pull the rudders off. Really straightforward. Test it out again. Everything's going to be fine. One of the other things that I forgot to mention, one of the benefits of having a bot with the hovers, is that if you do have a bad landing coming down off something, a bot with hovers is a lot easier to correct and get back on your legs. That's kind of one of my pet peeves, is kind of getting demolished because you get flipped on your back, and by the time you get back up onto the right side to resume firing, you've taken so much damage, you might as well have just self-destructed as soon as you saw yourself go onto your back. So you can see, we're flying around, we're not flipping around onto our back, we're not doing little backward loop-de-loops or spirals or anything like that. And when we lose control and do things silly like forget to hold down shift so that we don't get pushed off the wall, it's not horrible to correct the situation. We're actually basically flying now on 6 hover blades and 2 rudders. And then when we remember to hold shift, we stick to the wall until we forget to hold it as long as we need to make sure we can go over the ledge. That's sort of the acid test. Did you get all the way to the bottom? Well, you'll find out when you try and go over the ledge. So here we go. Proof of concept. We're in fairly decent shape. So I did want a little bit more control. I for some reason I just felt like I wanted those 2 rudders back on, so I did a little bit of experimenting to see where we might be able to put them in order to get them to work. And after a little bit of goofing around, kind of came to the realization that if we were going to get this stuff to fit anywhere, it was going to have to be sort of on the outer edges of the bot. So the good thing is, we're going to put the rudders on the side of the bot after you see me kind of goofing around here a little bit with smaller rudders to see if we can make them fit. They're not necessarily going to be well protected. They will be protected to some extent, but they will be one of the first things to go if you start getting flanked or shot from the side. But they're not critical. They're nice to have items, not need to have, and they may not even survive the whole build depending on how the CPU goes. So you can see we put the rudders back on the side. They do actually benefit the stability. So you can take a look at how it's performing now as just the prototype chassis with all the things in place. Next episode, we'll start building the chassis around with the proper armor blocks. So I'm looking forward to it. I'm having a lot of fun with the build. If you want to be notified when I add that next video, as always, you can subscribe to my channel. You can also follow me on social media for notifications of new videos. Links for those are always in the information section below the video. Please leave your comments and feedback, guys. Thanks for watching, and take care.